6 gymnasts from 4 different countries took home event final titles at the Pan American Games, and Felix Dolce came away as the most decorated male gymnast of the entire Games. For those of you new here, I'm Kinsley, and I'm the host of Neutral Deductions, a podcast all about men's gymnastics. So we're going to talk about everything that happened in men's event finals at the Pan American Games, so stay tuned.
This is the Neutral Deductions Podcast, men's gymnastic news, coverage, and analysis. Hosted by Kinsley Beal.
Event finals at large-scale events like the Pan American Games or the World Championships are split over 2 days. So on the first day of competition, it alternates with the women. So there's floor, pommel horse, and still rings for the men. And then on day 2, it's vault, parallel bars, and high bar. Felix Dolce came into this competition with already having a silver in the team and a gold in the all-around, and he was really on a roll. He was the highest qualifier for the floor exercise, and to be honest, if he did what he could do, he was going to win gold anyway, and that's exactly what happened. Before we get to Dolce's gold medal winning routine, I want to start with Juan Larajando of Colombia. So he got us started on the floor exercise, and he opened with a front full to a double front with a big cross step. And it took a minute for him to settle in, but once he settled in, he really did. And he ended up doing a stuck side double full. He did a really lovely pose after the handstand, and this is something that a lot of men struggle with. They don't actually do good corner transitions or add the artistry that we're looking for on the floor exercise. But I felt that Juan Larajando really did do a good job utilizing the artistic elements of floor. He ended with a triple full dismount with a big lunge forward, but he had a 13.366, and he had a long wait to see if that was going to be good enough for the podium. Rodrigo Gomez was next, and he just had a lot of extra power and flew out of bounds and didn't end up with a score that was going to be especially competitive with 13.066. Felix Dolce was next, and he opened with his signature front fold to front double pike, which he stuck, and it seems that in competition he sticks that more often than not. He also stuck his triple full dismount, and he ended up with a 14.233, which was just a little bit of a lower score than he got in qualifying, but honestly it was going to be a really hard score to beat. Donnell Wettenberg was next, and he had the most difficult routine of the competition with a 6.2 of difficulty, but he just had so much power and wasn't able to harness it, and he ended up falling and got a 12.7, which was definitely at this point going to take him out of the running for a medal. Arthur Norrie was the first person after the break. So for those of you who don't know, in large competition, the first 4 athletes in the event final go first, and then there is a break where the second 4 athletes get to warm up. So Arthur Norrie was the first person after that. He's the 2016 Olympic floor bronze medalist, and he showed why. He put on an absolute show for this routine and ended up with a 13.933, which put him into second place, and no one else was able to challenge the standings. So Felix Dolce came away with his 3rd medal of the Games, a gold on floor to match his gold in the all-around and silver in the team, followed by Arthur Norrie with silver and Juan Larajando of Colombia in bronze. So in between the floor and the pommel horse competition, the women started their competition on vault. So after they finished up vault, then the men came in for pommel horse. And Jason Rampersad of Canada was the leading qualifier, followed by his teammate Zachary Clay. But 2021 world champion Steven Nedorostik had fallen in qualification, so there was a lot of anticipation to see if he could come back, because if he was able to hit the routine, that gold was going to be his. So Cameron Bach, who's a University of Michigan graduate, he got the competition started on pommel horse, and he opened with a C-scissor into a partial Magyar, into a Tong Fei and a Roth, and his Magyar Savato went really cleanly, and then he was able to fly up into the handstand, and his routine is pretty short, but it's very efficient, and he got a 13.933, which was going to be a very competitive score, which would have put him 3rd based on the qualifying scores. Luca Alfieri of Argentina was up next. Again, another really short but really efficient routine. He got a 13.533, so it wasn't enough to top box score, but he was very excited with the job well done. So Steven Nedorostik has been working really hard to put in upgrades, and he's played and showed some difficulty up to a 7.0, which is one of the most difficult start value routines in the world, but he didn't show that here. He opened with a Mikulik, which is a skill who's named after his current coach, Sam Mikulik at Evo Gymnastics, and then he went into a Busnari, which is a traveling handstand, and he fought so hard through that. I honestly do not know how he stayed on. It was like truly miraculous, but that really did knock his rhythm out, and so he was not able to really get back on track. And then when he went up for his dismount, he didn't have enough swing, and he wasn't able to complete his intended dismount as well. And he got a 13.766, which was more than he got in qualifications and into second. But if the people going later in the competition were able to do what they could do, it was not going to be enough for the podium. The final person of the first half of the pommel horse final was Santiago Mayol of Argentina. And again, a short, efficient routine, but he did struggle with some form issues. He had his legs come apart on some of the traveling elements, and he had big fights throughout the routine, and it just wasn't going to be a score that was competitive. So coming back after the break was Nelson Guibal of Puerto Rico, who again opened with a C scissor. It was a very popular mount, and he did some spindles and had some really interesting travels that we don't often see in competition. He did a triple Russian dismount, so it's not one that flies up into the handstand, which we typically see the more difficult routines perform, but it was enough to get him a 14.133 and put him into first place. So one of the gymnasts that I was most excited about was Edward Gonzalez of Peru. And he was really low on some of his skills, specifically on the C scissor to open, and he wasn't quite in handstand on the lead knee, so that's the scissor up to handstand. He did good through his D flop and his woo, but he did have little breaks here and there, but he has so much promise. There is so much difficulty in this routine, and he's going to be one to watch in the future. The 12.9 that he got here wasn't going to be enough to get him on the podium, but he is definitely one to keep on your radar. So Zachary Clay of Canada was up next. He opened with a Li Ning and was good through his Stokely's and his D flop. And he was a little bit piked in his Tong Fei and Roth. So those are some of the long reach traveling elements going from one end of the pommel horse to the other. But he went cleanly through his Magyar and Savado, and he went really cleanly through his dismount, and he got a 14.4. And that was enough to put him in first place. So at this point, he knows he's going to get a medal. It's just which color. In fact, we knew at this point that Canada was going to get a gold medal because he was in first place. And the only person left to go was Jason Rampersad of Canada. I have to take a moment and talk about this. Is hilarious because Canada has been horrific at pommel horse in the past years. I mean, so incredibly bad. And in the team final, they were the highest scoring pommel horse team, which is just mind blowing. And then to have two athletes here in contention for the gold, it was just so amusing to those of us who have been following gymnastics for years and years and years. So it's really great to see that Canada has stepped forward and made the event that was their biggest weakness as one of their strengths. So Jason Rampersad goes up. His routine is pretty clean until he gets into the Roth. He was a little bit slow and a little bit piked. And then when he went for his Magyar Savado, he was a little bit skewed. So that's a term where you're not exactly direct facing the pommel horse. Your body is angled sort of, and it makes it easier to do the Magyar Savado, but it's not actually correct, and you do get deducted for it. And I think that that's really where he ended up losing the title. So he got a 14.333 and put him into second. So Zachary Clay won 14.4, followed by Jason Rampersad of Canada with a 14.333, and Nelson Guibal of Puerto Rico scored a 14.133.
Neutral Deductions is your exclusive gymnastics news platform focused entirely on men's gymnastics. To show your support, please subscribe to Neutral Deductions' YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram.
After pommel horse, the women went to go do their uneven bars routine, and then we came back to still rings for the men. So Colt Walker got us started off with a really strong routine. He got a 13.666, which in my opinion was a little bit low. I felt like he deserved a little bit higher. I would have gone maybe 13.8, but that's where the judges ranked him, and that was comparable to the score that he got in qualification. He had a 13.633 in qualification. Next was Christopher Boricas of Colombia. Again, he had a fairly solid routine. He also got a 13.666, but because he had lower execution, the tiebreak actually went to Colt. So Colt was in first place, followed by Christopher in second. Next was Daniel Villafañe of Argentina, who had qualified in second. And his Azerian Maltese, which is so hard, was very good. His inverted cross was really high, but he followed it up with a planche that was quite good. He was a little bit piked in the landing on his dismount, but his 14.133 was enough to put him into first place by quite a large margin. The thing with still rings is unless there's a huge margin in difficulty, basically the winner comes down to the landing on still rings dismount. So we went through Alejandro de la Cruz of Cuba, Fabian de Luna of Mexico, and Rene Cornier of Canada. All scored relatively similar routines with a 13.333, 13.266, and 13.633 respectively. So these were not breaking into the medal rankings at this point. Felix Dolce came up next with a really strong opening sequence in the Maltese 2 iron cross. His planche was excellent. There were just some small adjustments that he had in the handstands, and he stuck his double-double for a 13.8, and that put him into third. Finally, we had Donnell Wittenberg of the USA, and he was the top qualifier. And unless something disastrous happened, he was going to be the gold medal winner at the end of the day. And he did his Kiptum Maltese. His legs were a little bit low, so you want to keep yourself perfectly parallel to the ground. So his was just a little bit angled, but not a big deal. He pressed from the Maltese up to a planche, did an Azarian iron cross. He had some small bobbles in the handstand and a small hop on his dismount, but it definitely was going to be a medal. And sure enough, it was a 14.2, enough to bump Daniel Villafañe out of the top lead, who had a 14.133, and then Felix Dolce won his fourth medal of the games with a bronze on still rings. Now let's move over to day 2 of the competition, which was just the next day. These athletes must be absolutely exhausted from going competition to competition to competition. But coming in, we had vault, parallel bars, and high bars. So Yuri Guimarães of Brazil was the top qualifier for vault, and I think it's fair to say that most everyone was rooting for him to get a medal because he had had a heartbreak on floor. He was in a bronze medal position during qualifying for floor, and he just did not have a good performance and was just absolutely distraught. And I think as any fan, you just look at him and you think, oh my goodness, you worked so hard for this and you weren't able to show the hard work that you had put into it. And so I wanted this moment for him to be able to redeem himself. Overall, this vault final was a little bit different than one that we see at the World Championships. So typically at the World Championships, you're going to see someone with a 6-0 difficulty vault. We didn't see anyone with a 6-0 difficulty vault here, and we only saw 2 people with a 5-6 difficulty vault. So most everyone was doing 5-2, 5-2 difficulty vault. At the World Championships, there was only one athlete, Kevin Pinev, who had a 5-2 and a 5-2 difficulty vault. So Felix Dolce went first with a cos 1.5, followed by a handspring double front. Both were good, clean, pretty in the air. They had some landing issues, like little hops here and there, with an average of 14.383. He was followed up by Arthur Nori Mariano, who did a Shufelt vault, which is named after Kyle Shufelt, who's an Olympic champion. It's the Yurchenko 2.5 vault, known as the Aminar in women's gymnastics. So he took a big step forward, got a 14.5 on that vault, and then did a cos 1.5 for his second vault, and he ended up with a 14.466 average. Yuri Guimarães was third, and he also did a cos 1.5, which in my opinion was the best of the 3 that we had seen up to that point, and the judges rewarded him for that. He got a 14.533, and then he went forward for his Rocher vault, which is the handspring double front, and he worked really, really hard to keep his legs together, which is not something that we see a lot in men's gymnastics. Usually we see them cowboyed with their legs splayed open like they're about to give birth, but he actually kept his legs together, which was really nice, but he opened up too early, and he ended up having to take several steps back because he was under-rotated, and he went into third with a 14.133. Next up was Andres Reyes of the Dominican Republic, who had just earned himself a spot to compete at the Paris Olympic Games. He opened with a cos 1.5 that was very solid. He got a 14.366, and then he is one of the 2 athletes who performed a 5.6 difficulty vault in this competition. So he did what's called a Dragulescu, which is a handspring double front and half out. It's the most difficult vault we had seen up to this point, and he did go out of bounds, but it was a big score of 14.566, which gave him an average of 14.466, moving him to the lead. In the second half of the rotation, we had Juan Larajando of Colombia, Daniel Villafañe of Argentina, Alejandro de la Cruz of Cuba, and Josue Armijo of Chile. And none of these athletes were able to top the vaults that we had seen in the first half of the rotation. So we ended up with the final result of Andres Reyes of Dominican Republic winning gold, followed by Arthur Nori Mariano of Brazil, and in third, Felix Dolce of Canada. Now at this point, Felix has won his 5th medal, and there is no one who can catch him, and he officially at this point became the most decorated male gymnast of the Pan American Games. The parallel bar competition was always going to be really interesting because we had the reigning Pan American Games parallel bar champion Isaac Nunez of Mexico, Kern Phillips, who is incredibly solid on this event. He's in fact one of the best in the world. His former teammate Colt Walker, also very good, but Curran had fallen in qualifications. Even with the fall, he was still leading the qualification results, which is insane. If that just tells you how much difficulty he has and how much he has mastery over this event when he hits. But of course, you never know what's going to happen, and so it made for a very, very exciting final. Isaac Nunez of Mexico got us started on the parallel bars, and he has this incredibly beautiful line. It is so pleasing to watch. And he went really well through his first sequences, through the Peaches, through the Diamondovs, and then he had good turnover on the Tapelt. And then when he went for his Stutz, he ended up having to walk all over the parallel bars, and it's a 10th, like each time you're walking. And so I knew that that was going to deeply affect his score, and he got a 13.833, which was lower than he got in qualifying, and in fact would have been the very lowest score to qualify him into this final. Overall, athletes scored much lower in this final than they did in qualifications. The big exception to that was Curran Phillips, so he did not fall off of his routine. He makes the DM half, makes the Stutz. He's a little bit slow on his Makut's element, but other than that, his routine was near perfect. He got a 15.4, which is exactly what was scored at the World Championships to win gold. And if that just doesn't speak to his competitiveness worldwide, I don't know what else does. Now, he does have a few consistency issues with being able to hit multiple routines in a row. So once he's able to fix that, he is absolutely going to make a case for him to be on that Olympic team or on future world teams as well. Next up was his teammate, Colt Walker. They are current U.S. national team members together and then former Stanford gymnasts together. He had a wonderful routine. He stuck his double front dismount. He doesn't have quite as much difficulty as Curran Phillips, but that routine was spectacular, and at that point, I was pretty sure that no one was going to top them for the gold-silver pairing. And that's exactly what happened. So Diogo Escobar of Cuba goes up. He got a 12.733. William Amard went up. It was a fine routine. He did have a few struggles here and there, but I think the saddest thing for me about William Amard was he was the only one of the Canadians who didn't come away with an individual medal, and it really doesn't speak to how exceptional of an athlete he is. And he made a post on Instagram about how he's going to take a little bit of time to grieve and to think through this process. And it's been a lot of highs and lows this year, right? The highs of qualifying for the Olympics, the lows of not performing his best at the Pan American Games. But regardless of that, we finished out the parallel bars competition. Curran Phillips in first by a huge margin, 15.4 over Colt Walker in second with a 14.366. And to have over a point margin in an event final is insane. Like, this never ever happens. So that really should speak to how good Curran Phillips is on this event. And then the former Pan American Games champion, Isaac Nunez, closed us out with a 13.833 for the bronze medal.
Neutral Deductions recently launched this year and is entirely funded by listener contributions. If you'd like to support the show and help promote men's gymnastics, kindly consider making a donation through the PayPal link provided in the show notes. All donations are greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Coming in for the final event for high bar, Bernardo Miranda of Brazil was leading qualifications, barely ahead of his teammate Arthur Nori Mariano of Brazil, who's a former world champion. And then Cameron Bach was in third. And this was a really interesting event final because they actually had to go all the way down to 11th place to bring people into this event final because so many people got two per country. So the first couple of routines were performed by Luca Alfieri of Argentina, William Amard of Canada, and Colt Walker of the USA. And especially these first two routines had pretty low difficulty comparatively, 4.8 and 4.4 for Luca and Will. And it's really, really hard to make a score that's going to be super competitive for an event final when your D score is that low, and that's exactly what happened for them. So Colt Walker got a 13.666, which at this point put him into the lead, and it's so funny because that's exactly what he scored in qualifying, so he's nothing if not consistent. Former world champion Arthur Nori Mariano finished out that first half of the rotation with a beautiful tuck half to Lucan. He had an endo, he does his tuck full to Yamawaki. It's just the coolest routine. And he had a near stuck double-double with a 14.333 to put him into the lead. Cameron Bach's routine had German giants, which are always a crowd favorite, and his 13.766 put him into a provisional second place. Then came Rene Cournois of Canada. He had a tuck half to handstand, which was near perfect, and that is such a hard skill to get right. So many athletes either go the wrong way or they are too late and they get deducted, so that was really nice to see. He did have a Yamawaki to Endo and then just a small hop on his double-double layout with a 14.066 to put him into a provisional second place behind Arthur Nori. Andres Reyes of the Dominican Republic had a fall, which took him out of medal running, and the final competitor of the day was Bernardo Miranda of Brazil on high bar. He had a really clean routine, just a few steps back on the dismount. He had an 8.833 E-score, which is really good for high bar. He had a 14.133 total, which put him into second, so Arthur Nori Mariano took home the gold for Brazil, followed by his teammate Bernardo Miranda, and then Rene Cournois of Canada brought home another medal for Canada. Canada actually ended up being the most decorated team of this entire competition, which is, again, just a testament to how hard this team has been working, and I'm so excited to see what they're going to do next year. So that's it for our coverage of the 2023 Pan American Games. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. That really helps us out. And if you would like to help us out financially, we still are looking for about $414 to help cover the cost of going to the World Championships to bring you live coverage, including interviews, live blogs, and more. So I'll link our PayPal down below. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.